There is a morning that most people have never thought about. It's early. The desert is cold the way only desert mornings can be cold. The kind of cold that gets into your bones before the sun has had a chance to do anything about it. The year is somewhere around 1446 BC, give or take, though the exact date does not matter as much as what happened that morning. A man stands at the entrance of a tent. Not just any tent. The most elaborate structure ever assembled in the wilderness. A dwelling made of acacia wood and blue linen and gold clasps and curtains so fine that the light from the lampstands passes through them like fire through gauze. The craftsmen have been working for months. The priests have been consecrated. The bronze altar is ready. The courtyard is in place. And now, on the morning it is completed, Moses stands at the entrance. He is 80 years old. He walked out of Egypt and through the Red Sea and up a mountain into a cloud that terrified everyone watching from below. He spoke with God face to face, the way you spoke with a friend. And now he is about to walk into the place where that conversation continues. According to Jewish tradition, recorded in the Midrash, compiled centuries later but drawing on oral memory far older, Moses wrote Psalm 91 on this morning, this specific morning. Standing at the entrance of the tabernacle, about to step into what the psalm calls the setter of the Most High, the secret place, Moses put words to something he had been living for 80 years. Stay with me. Because what he wrote was not what most people think it is. Most people read Psalm 91 the way you read a promise on a wall calendar. 1,000 shall fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Beautiful, comforting. A shield for hard days. You underline it, you memorize it, you write it on a card and tape it to your bathroom mirror. And it is all of those things. But here is what most people miss. Psalm 91 is not a monologue. It is not one person speaking alone into silence. It is a drama, a conversation. 3 separate voices speaking in sequence, passing words back and forth like singers in a choir, which, according to scholars from Franz Delitzsch in the 19th century to Walter Brueggemann in our own generation, is exactly how it was used. In ancient Israel, this psalm was antiphonal. It was sung in parts. Different voices carried different lines. The shifts in grammar, from third person to first person to second person, back and forth without explanation, are not accidents of translation. They are stage directions. And when you hear the 3 voices separately, this psalm will never sound the same to you again. The first voice begins in verse 1, and it speaks about God in the third person, he, his, as if pointing at someone standing nearby. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. You are listening to a witness, a teacher, someone who has seen something that changed them, and they are pulling you by the sleeve. Not I am here, that comes in a moment. Not God says, that comes much later. This is a person pointing. Look at that man standing in the shelter. Look where he is. Do you see what I see? The Hebrew word for dwelleth here is Yashav. It does not mean a brief visit. It does not mean stops by occasionally when things are difficult. Yashav means to settle, to build a home, to pull up a chair and decide that this is where you live. It is the word used for a city inhabited for generations. A people who have put down roots so deep that you can no longer imagine them anywhere else. And the setter, the secret place, is the hiding shelter, the concealed place, the hollow in the rock where you press yourself when the wind is dangerous. The Holy of Holies in the tabernacle was this, the innermost chamber where the presence of God concentrated itself into the space between the wings of the cherubim. That is the image. A place so hidden, so protected, that only one person in all of Israel could enter it, and only once a year. This voice says you can live there. No visits, no drop-ins. Live. And the cell of the Almighty, the shadow. In the ancient Near East, shade was not a small thing. In the Sinai Peninsula, in the Jordan Valley, the sun is not gentle. It kills livestock. It cracks clay and burns skin and turns men into stumbling, delirious creatures who walk in circles. Shadow, the shadow of a great rock, the shadow of a mountain, the shadow of a wide-branched tree, was the difference between life and death. The psalm opens by saying that God is a shadow large enough to stand in. Now the second voice enters. It is sudden, it's personal. And almost every reader skips past it so quickly they barely notice it happened. Verse 2, I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. The voice has changed. We are no longer listening to a witness pointing at someone else. We are listening to one person alone speaking directly to God. The third person vanishes. The crowd falls silent. And a single voice says quietly, almost quietly enough to miss, my. Just that word, my. The Expositor's Bible Commentary, a heavyweight collection of scholarship that took decades to compile, described this moment with a sentence I have not been able to shake. It said that the solo voice does not say much, but it says enough. And then he said this, faith has no need to vary its expression. The deepest emotions, like songbirds, have only 2 or 3 notes, and they sing them over and over all the long day through. The psalmist hears the great truth declared by the witness voice, and his response is not a theological proposition. It is not a doctrine or an argument. It is just this: he is mine, and I trust him. That is the second voice. 2 verses, both nearly identical. That is all the soloist gets. But here is the part nobody tells you. The second voice appears twice in Psalm 91. Once in verse 2 and once in the opening of verse 9, "For thou, Lord, art my refuge, my most high, my dwelling place." Delitzsch describes this as faith returning to his one note with what he calls sweet monotony. Not because the psalmist has nothing else to say, but because there is nothing else to say. You can run out of words for terror. You can run out of words for danger. But if you have learned to say, "He is mine," you will never run out of that word. Because every time you say it, it means something new. Here is what this second voice teaches you about prayer, about trust, about every moment in your life when the darkness is crowding the edges of your field of vision, and the promises on your bathroom mirror seem thin as paper. The psalmist does not write a psalm. He sings 2 lines, and they are enough. Now, before the third voice enters, before God speaks, I need to plant something in your mind. A detail that may seem strange right now and will make complete sense by the end. Centuries after Moses walked into the tabernacle, centuries after David assembled these psalms into the book we hold, a man stands on the highest point of the temple in Jerusalem. The wind is sharp. The drop below him is 100 feet, maybe more. And standing beside him is a being whose intelligence has never been matched by any creature on earth, whose knowledge of Scripture is encyclopedic, and whose agenda is destruction. And this being opens his mouth, and he quotes Psalm 91. Hold that thought, because first the choir has to sing. The first voice returns in verse 3, and this time it is not alone. This is the chorus, the community, the congregation who has heard the soloist declare, "He is mine," and they respond with everything they have. "Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence." Thee, not you in the abstract, thee, this one person. The chorus turns to the soloist, and they speak promises over them like a covering. What follows in verses 3 through 13 is one of the most comprehensive lists of protection in all of ancient literature. Snare of the fowler, deadly pestilence, terror by night, arrow by day, pestilence in darkness, destruction at noon, 1,000 falling at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, the young lion, the serpent. Scholars suggest the original setting may have been military, an army gathered before battle, a priest walking the lines, speaking these promises over soldiers about to step into something from which not all of them would come back. You can almost hear it. The tortoise, the pre-dawn silence, the sound of armor being adjusted, and a voice moving through the ranks saying, "You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day." Pay attention to this. The psalm uses 4 different names for God in the first 2 verses alone. El Elyon, Most High, the God who towers above every other power. El Shaddai, Almighty, the God of overwhelming sufficiency, the word that first appears in Genesis when God comes to Abraham and simply says, "I am God enough." The covenant name, the name so sacred that devout Jews did not speak it aloud, the name that means "I am who I am, I will be who I will be," the name that contains all of time inside it. And Elohim, the creative God, the God of power and majesty, the God who spoke and the universe answered. 4 names in 2 verses. The psalmist is not being repetitive. The psalmist is saying, every category of power you can imagine God holding, transcendence, sufficiency, covenant, faithfulness, creative authority, every single one of those is standing between you and whatever is coming. The Hebrew word for pestilence in verse 3 is never. Moses knew never. He had watched it roll across a country like weather, killing livestock across an entire nation. He wrote it into the psalm, not to frighten, but to say even that is under control. The destruction that wastes at noonday in verse 6 is the Kedev, almost certainly the desert sirocco, the hot wind from the east that could suffocate a traveler in minutes, that came without warning, that the Arabs called the poison wind. You could be walking in full sun, perfectly healthy, and within the hour the wind would turn and you would be gone. Even the sirocco, even that. And this is where it gets remarkable. The Talmud, compiled centuries after Moses, drawing on traditions even older, called Psalm 91 by 2 names, the Song of Plagues and the Song Against Evil Spirits. In Jewish protective tradition, this psalm was recited over the sick, over new mothers, over travelers, over soldiers. The Aramaic Targum, the ancient translation used in synagogues produced around the 4th century, went further and expanded every danger in the psalm into its demonic counterpart. The terror of night becomes the terror of demons who walk at night. The pestilence becomes the angel of death. The destruction at noon becomes the company of demons that attacks at noon. Whether you take the demonological reading literally or not, something telling is in it. The people who lived closest to this psalm, who sang it and memorized it and whispered it over their children, understood it to be combat language, not metaphor, not poetry for poetry's sake, a weapon. They sang this psalm because they believed they were going into something real. Verse 9 opens and the soloist returns. For you, Lord, art my refuge. It is almost word for word what verse 2 said. Delitzsch described this return with the phrase I mentioned earlier, sweet monotony, and said, love loves to repeat itself. The soloist has heard everything the chorus declared. The snares, the pestilence, the arrows, the 10,000. And the response is not a detailed analysis of each promise. The response is, he is mine. Still. Again, in a new way and in the exact same way. This is what faith looks like under pressure. Not new words, not louder words, not more sophisticated words. The same words returning to the mouth like a song you have known since childhood that means more each time you say it because now it is carrying more weight. The chorus responds in verses 9 through 13 with a second wave of promises, amplified, elevated, climbing towards something. The angels appear. He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. On their hands they shall bear thee up, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Here is what most people miss about that. The promise is not that you will never encounter stones. It is that the angels will hold you up in the midst of them. You will walk through the exact terrain where stones could break you, and hands you cannot see will be under your feet. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder. The young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. 5 forms of danger. Snakes, cobras, young lions, the tannin, the great sea monster of ancient chaos. Everything that made the night dangerous and the wilderness deadly. And the psalm says, you will walk over all of it now. Here is something I want you to sit with. By the time we reach verse 13, a first-century Jewish reader would have recognized a pattern. The image of treading on the serpent's head goes all the way back to Genesis 3. The very first promise ever made after the fall, the first promise in the whole Bible was this: the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, tread on snakes, trample the enemy underfoot. Psalm 91:13 echoes Genesis 3:15. The psalm is not only about personal protection, it is pointing at something, at someone. A figure who will do all of this in the most complete sense possible. A figure who centuries later would be standing on a temple rooftop, with the enemy quoting this very psalm to his face. And then God speaks. Verses 14 through 16, the third voice, the final voice. And this is the voice that most people breeze past in their rush to underline verse 7 or memorize verse 11. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high because he has known my name. He shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. These are the only verses in the entire psalm where the first person represents God. For 16 verses, God is spoken about. The witness speaks about him. The chorus sings about his protection, his feathers, his faithfulness. And then, in the last 3 verses, God stops being the subject of someone else's sentence. He speaks for himself. And every promise he makes here is personal, addressed to one specific kind of person, because he has set his love upon me, because he has known my name, when he calls. The Hebrew word for set his love is chashak, a word that appears in Deuteronomy when Moses tells Israel that God did not choose them because they were the largest nation or the most impressive. He chose them because he chashak them. He was attached to them, bound to them. The way a craftsman keeps his hand on a piece of work he refuses to put down and walk away from. God is saying, because this person has fastened their love on me, I am fastened back. 6 promises follow: deliverance, elevation, answer presence, honor, long life. And the last word in the psalm in the Hebrew, the final word, is Yeshua. Not safe, not protected, not just long life on earth. Yeshua, the word that gives us the name Yeshua, Jesus. The psalm ends with God saying, I will show him my Yeshua, my salvation now. The moment I planted in your mind earlier, the wilderness of Judea. 14 centuries after Moses walked into the tabernacle, Jesus has been fasting 40 days. 40 days without food in rocky ravines and thorn bush in a desert that has no mercy. He is physically at the limit of what a human body can sustain. And then the enemy comes. 3 temptations. Turn stones to bread, refused. Bow down and receive the kingdoms of the world, refused. And the second, the one in the middle, the one that lives in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, the second is this. Satan takes Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple, the highest point. The drop below is somewhere around 100 feet. The city of Jerusalem is below, full of pilgrims and priests and the whole machinery of Jewish worship. And Satan says, throw yourself down. And then he opens his mouth and quotes scripture. For he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will carry you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Psalm 91:11 and 12. This is not a careless move. This is a calculated one. Of all the scriptures in the entire Hebrew Bible, Satan chose the most famous protection psalm in the tradition. The psalm soldiers sang before battle. The psalm mothers whispered over sick children. The psalm the rabbis called the song against evil spirits. He weaponized it. But here is where it gets remarkable. Spurgeon saw it first. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who read the Bible the way a jeweler reads light through a stone. Spurgeon pointed out that Satan quoted Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12, but he left out 4 words. The original text reads, "He will command his angels concerning you to keep you in all your ways." Satan's version, "He will command his angels concerning you." He cut the condition. He removed "in all your ways." He edited the promise to make it sound absolute, unconditional, a magic shield that would activate regardless of whether you were living inside God's will or manufacturing a spectacle to force a miracle. The promise was never unconditional. The protection was for the person walking in God's ways, not for the person arranging a public demonstration. Satan stripped the condition, then applied the promise. Spurgeon called it devilish, but it gets stranger still. Notice what Satan never quoted. Verse 13, the verse immediately after the ones he cited. "Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder. The young lion and the serpent thou shalt trample under feet." The serpent. The being standing on that temple rooftop, using this psalm as a weapon against Jesus, was himself named in the very next line. He knew what verse 13 meant. He knew what it pointed toward. And he thing not to read it. He couldn't read it. Not to Jesus. Not on that day. This is what you need to understand about Psalm 91. The 3 voices are not a structural curiosity. They are a theology of relationships. The witness speaks, the believer answers. God confirms. And the entire psalm, all 16 verses, forms a complete circuit. A conversation between a human soul and the God who made it, with the community of faith standing around them saying, "Yes, this is real. We have seen it. We are seeing it now." 3 takeaways. And the last one is the one I want you to carry out of this video and into whatever is waiting for you today. The first is this. This psalm is not a promise machine. It does not activate automatically when you read the right words. Satan quoted it. Satan quoted it with full knowledge of the text, more precisely than most preachers, and Jesus refused to apply it the way Satan suggested. The protection of Psalm 91 belongs to the person described in the opening line. The person who has Yashav, who has settled their life in the secret place, who has made God their actual dwelling rather than their emergency contact. You cannot read your way into this psalm. You have to live your way in. The second takeaway is the second voice. In the entire architecture of this psalm, the grand declarations of the witness, the thundering promises of the chorus, the personal confirmation of God at the end, the soloist gets 2 lines. 2 nearly identical lines, and the scholars call them sweet monotony. This is not a failure of vocabulary. This is a description of maturity. The most spiritually grounded people I have known are not the ones with the most elaborate prayers. They are the ones who have learned to say one thing, "He is mine and I trust him," and to mean it absolutely. In the middle of the night, in the doctor's office, in the year everything fell apart. 2 lines, over and over, it is enough. The third takeaway is the one this psalm was always building toward. You are not a person who occasionally visits a safe place when things become unbearable. You are not a person who checks in with God during crises and checks back out when the crisis passes. The first word of this psalm, Yashav, to dwell, means you live here. You have put down roots here. Your address is the secret place of the Most High. This is not the life of someone who keeps God at arm's length and calls on him in emergencies. This is not the life of someone whose faith is a set of insurance policies that may or may not pay out. This is the life of someone so settled in the presence of God that when the snare is set and the arrow is flying and 1,000 fall beside you, you are not started, you are not running, you are home. God does not say to the person in verse 14, "Because you occasionally visited me." He says, "Because he has set his love upon me," fastened, bound, tied. And to that person, God says 6 things: deliverance, elevation, answer, presence, honor, and then the last word, Yeshua, salvation. Moses stood at the entrance of the tabernacle on a cold desert morning and put words to what he had been living for 80 years. He had been in the cloud. He had heard the voice from the burning bush. He had walked between walls of water and watched a nation cross on dry ground. He had been in the presence of the Most High, not visited, not passed through, but settled there. And this is what he had to say about it. 3 voices. One points to the shelter and says, "Look at this place." One says, "He is mine." And one at the very end, after all the promises have been made, after all the dangers have been named and covered, one voice turns to you directly and says, "Because you have set your love on me, I will be with you in trouble. Not I will prevent the trouble, not I will explain the trouble, not I will schedule the trouble for a more convenient season. I will be with you, in it, inside it, here." That is not the shield that keeps disaster at a distance. That is the God who walks into disaster beside you. And that, after everything, is the only promise that has ever been enough. If this psalm has meant something to you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. The community of faith has been singing these three voices for 3,000 years. It was designed to be passed on. He had heard the voice from the burning bush. He had walked between walls of water and watched a nation cross on dry ground. He had been in the presence of the Most High, not visited, not passed through, but settled there. And this is what he had to say about it. Three voices. One points to the shelter and says, "Look at this place." One says, "He is mine." And one at the very end, after all the promises have been made, after all the dangers have been named and covered, one voice turns to you directly and says, "Because you have set your love on me, I will be with you in trouble. Not I will prevent the trouble, not I will explain the trouble, not I will schedule the trouble for a more convenient season. I will be with you, in it, inside it, here." That is not the shield that keeps disaster at a distance. That is the God who walks into disaster beside you, and that, after everything, is the only promise that has ever been enough. If this psalm has meant something to you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. The community of faith has been singing these three voices for 3,000 years. It was designed to be passed on. He had heard the voice from the burning bush. He had walked between walls of water and watched a nation cross on dry ground. He had been in the presence of the Most High, not visited, not passed through, but settled there, and this is what he had to say about it. Three voices. One points to the shelter and says, "Look at this place." One says, "He is mine." And one, at the very end, after all the promises have been made, after all the dangers have been named and covered, one voice turns to you directly and says, "Because you have set your love on me, I will be with you in trouble. Not I will prevent the trouble, not I will explain the trouble, not I will schedule the trouble for a more convenient season. I will be with you, in it, inside it, here." That is not the shield that keeps disaster at a distance. That is the God who walks into disaster beside you. And that, after everything, is the only promise that has ever been enough. If this psalm has meant something to you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. The community of faith has been singing these three voices for 3,000 years. It was designed to be passed on.